She arrived at the courthouse, acting as if her bank account came with its own set of laws. In her mind, money could solve every problem, earn respect, erase consequences, and even bend the rule of justice itself. According to a witness, she had said as much to her assistant in the parking garage just minutes earlier. "Municipal court perfect. I'll show him how this city really operates." Those words set the tone long before the hearing had even begun. When Victoria Hensley stepped into Providence Municipal Court that Tuesday morning, she brought with her a venti latte, oversized designer sunglasses, and the unmistakable confidence of someone used to getting her way. Her phone was already in her hand, notifications chiming. She didn't bother removing the sunglasses at sign-in, and she didn't silence her phone even when it kept buzzing. When the clerk politely asked her to toss the coffee before entering the courtroom, she smirked and replied, "It's a local court, not the Supreme Court." The clerk calmly made a note, her first mark on the record before the judge ever saw her. "Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to order in the court. What you're about to see is a reminder that you can try to splash your attitude at the justice system, but sometimes it returns the favor with even more heat at exactly 9:46 a.m. Clerk Paige Lewis called the next matter on the docket. Case number 25 TR 5812, City of Providence versus Victoria Hensley. The list of charges echoed through the room: reckless operation, failure to yield, and interfering with the police investigation. Every eye in the courtroom shifted as Hensley approached the podium, latte still clutched tightly in her hand. Judge Frank Caprio lifted his gaze. "Miss Hensley, no beverages at the podium. Please place your drink on the table behind you." Victoria slid the cup to the very edge of the podium instead, half obedience, half defiance. The judge clarified, "Miss Hensley, I said the table." She shrugged. "It's fine here." Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. "It's not optional, it's the rule." Only then did she snatch the cup, walk it to the defense table, and drop it loudly enough for the entire room to hear. Her attitude had made its first official appearance long before testimony did. Judge Caprio opened the case file. "Miss Hensley, you are accused of reckless operation on October 18th at the intersection of Westminster and Dorrance. Court documents indicate you drove through a red light and nearly collided with another vehicle containing 2 civilians. Furthermore, when Officer Nolan initiated a stop, you allegedly interfered with his duties. How do you plead?" Victoria flipped her hair. "Not guilty." "Very well," the judge said. "You'll have the opportunity to respond after the officer testifies. This should be straightforward." He nodded toward the uniformed officer waiting near the clerk's table. "Officer Daniel Nolan, please approach to be sworn in." Officer Nolan, age 31 and in full uniform, stepped to the witness stand with a professional calm. Clerk Lewis administered the oath. "Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," he replied firmly. Judge Caprio gave a single nod, signaling that the real hearing was finally underway. Officer Nolan was called to recount his observations from October 18th. He opened his notebook and began. "Your Honor, at approximately 4:27 p.m., I was patrolling near the intersection of Westminster and Dorrance. I saw a white Mercedes sedan, Rhode Island registration LXR 492, accelerate through a solid red light. The vehicle crossed the intersection at a notable speed and passed within roughly 3 feet of a blue Honda Civic that held the right-of-way. The Honda driver had to brake sharply to avoid a collision." Judge Caprio asked, "Did you initiate a stop?" "Yes, Your Honor," Nolan replied. "I activated my emergency lights and conducted a traffic stop about 2 blocks east on Westminster Street." The courtroom grew quiet as he continued. "When I approached the vehicle, the driver, identified as Ms. Hensley, stepped out before I reached her door. She was on a phone call. I instructed her to end the call and return to her vehicle. She responded by telling me to wait." "And did she comply?" the judge asked. "After roughly 30 seconds, yes," Nolan said. "She ended the call but remained standing outside her car." "And your next action?" "I informed her that she had driven through a red light and nearly caused an accident. I requested her driver's license and registration. Did she provide them? She did eventually. But first she said, "Do you know who I am?" Hensley immediately interjected from the podium. "I never said that." Judge Caprio lifted a hand. "Ms. Hensley, you will have the opportunity to respond. Officer Nolan, continue." Nolan resumed. After giving me her license, she stated, quote, "If you make this legal, you'll regret it financially." I took that as an attempt to pressure me regarding the citation. The judge leaned back. "Did you consider that a threat?" "Yes, Your Honor." It felt like she was suggesting there would be financial or legal consequences for performing my duties. "What did you do next?" I informed her that threatening or attempting to influence an officer could lead to additional violations. She replied she wasn't threatening me, just explaining how things work. Then she asked what amount would resolve the stop and make the situation disappear. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Judge Caprio narrowed his eyes. "She offered you money?" "Not explicitly cash, Your Honor," Nolan explained. "But she said, 'Officers like you earn around $40,000 a year. I can make problems vanish. Think about it.'" The implication felt clear. "And your response?" I told her I was issuing the citation and that any further attempts to interfere would result in additional charges. She then took a photo of my badge number and said her attorney would be contacting me shortly. "She signed the citation?" "Yes, but she made it clear she was doing so under protest." Then she left the scene. Judge Caprio made several notes on the file in front of him before asking, "Officer Nolan, in your 9 years with the Providence Police Department, have you ever accepted money to dismiss a citation?" "Never, Your Honor." "Has anyone ever tried?" "Twice. And in both cases, I added the appropriate charges." "Thank you, officer." "Ms. Hensley, your response." Victoria picked up her coffee cup again, despite the earlier warning, and carried it back to the podium. Judge Caprio's patience thinned. "Ms. Hensley, I told you beverages are not allowed at the podium." "It's just coffee, Your Honor," she replied. "It's not dangerous." "It is a rule," he answered. "Return it to the table." She placed it on the podium's edge in the exact spot as before. "Same issue, Ms. Hensley," the judge said. "It isn't bothering anyone." Judge Caprio glanced at Bailiff Harris. Without a word, Harris walked over, took the cup, and placed it behind her on the defense table. Hensley's jaw tightened in frustration. "This is unnecessary," she muttered. "This is courtroom decorum," the judge responded evenly. "Now, you may address the testimony." Victoria crossed her arms. "Officer Nolan has a very creative memory. I never threatened him, and I certainly didn't offer him anything improper. I simply made it clear that I have legal resources and won't be pushed around by someone who might be having a rough day." "You're saying the officer invented parts of his report?" Judge Caprio asked. "I'm saying officers exaggerate details all the time. It makes the situation sound dramatic." "Did you drive through the red light?" "It was yellow when I entered the intersection," she insisted. "Officer Nolan says it was red." Officer Nolan was half a block away. "He was close enough to observe the Honda Civic slam on its brakes to avoid you," the judge countered. "Almost hitting someone is not the same as actually doing it," Victoria said. "Ms. Hensley," Judge Caprio replied calmly, "the driver of that Honda is present in the courtroom. Would you like to hear his account?" She lifted a hand dismissively. "Fine, let's hear it." Judge Caprio signaled to the gallery. "Mr. Harold Grant, please come forward and be sworn." A man in his 60s, wearing a work jacket and carrying a quiet, steady presence, stepped toward the witness stand. Miss Lewis administered the oath as the courtroom waited for another perspective on what happened that afternoon. "Mr. Grant, were you operating the blue Honda Civic on October 18th at the intersection of Westminster and Dorrance?" Judge Caprio asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Grant replied. "My wife was in the passenger seat at the time." "Please explain what happened." Grant took a steady breath. "We had the green light, so I proceeded through the intersection as usual. Out of nowhere, a white Mercedes shot through from the left side at a high speed. I hit the brakes as hard as I could, and my wife let out a scream. The Mercedes missed us by only a couple of feet. 2, maybe 3 at most. Did the vehicle stop after entering the intersection? The judge asked. No, Your Honor. It continued straight through without slowing. If Officer Nolan hadn't stopped her a few blocks later, she would have driven on like nothing happened. Did you speak with Ms. Hensley after the stop? I tried, Grant said. I got out to let her know how close she came to injuring us. I thought maybe she didn't realize the severity of it. What happened? The judge asked. Grant glanced toward Hensley, then returned his attention to the bench. She told me to get back in my car. I told her she almost hurt my wife. She reached into her wallet, pulled out a card, and said, "How much to make you go away?" The courtroom fell completely still. Judge Caprio placed his pen on the desk. She offered you money? Yes, Your Honor, Grant said. She told me to name a figure and that she could write a check immediately. And how did you respond? I told her I didn't want anything from her. I just wanted drivers like her off the road. She laughed and said something like, "You drive a 10-year-old Civic. You sure you don't want the money?" That's not what I said, Hensley snapped. Judge Caprio raised a hand. Ms. Hensley, you will have a chance to respond. Mr. Grant, continue. Officer Nolan stepped in at that point, Grant explained. He told her to stop speaking and directed me back to my vehicle. I complied. He took my statement afterward, gave me a case number, and told me I might be called as a witness. And here you are today, the judge said. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Grant. You may step down. Grant returned to his seat. Judge Caprio turned his attention to Hensley. Ms. Hensley, he began. Mr. Grant's testimony supports Officer Nolan's account in every major detail. Both statements indicate that you attempted to use money to silence them. That's their interpretation, she replied dismissively. Two separate individuals, same description of events, the judge said. And you are suggesting this is coincidence? This city makes a fortune on traffic tickets, she said. Everyone knows it. My taxes help keep this courtroom operating, and I'm still treated like this. The courtroom isn't funded by ego, Ms. Hensley, the judge replied. It's funded by responsibility. You're not being criticized for paying taxes. You're facing consequences for nearly causing a collision and attempting to interfere with an officer's duty. That behavior isn't civil. It crosses into criminal territory. The time was 9:58 a.m. when accountability officially became part of the record. Judge Caprio opened another folder. Ms. Hensley, I'm reviewing your driving history. This isn't your first violation. Everyone gets tickets, she said. Not everyone has a documented incident involving interference, the judge said. May 20th, 2023. You were cited by Officer Ramirez for failing to stop at a posted sign. The report states you tried to settle the matter privately. That charge was later withdrawn. That case was resolved. How? The judge asked. We came to an understanding, she responded. An understanding? Judge Caprio repeated. Meaning you paid him to overlook the violation? Meaning we handled it without wasting the court's time, Hensley said. The judge closed the folder slowly. Ms. Hensley, convincing an officer to ignore a violation is not a resolution. It is improper conduct. That record is sealed from the public, not from the bench. And what I see is a pattern. You appear to believe money can erase consequences. Money solves plenty of things, she said. Maybe not legal matters, but it keeps this city running. With respect, Your Honor, I pay more in taxes than most people in this room earn in a year. I fund the infrastructure, the schools, the police force. So yes, I believe I've earned some consideration. You cannot purchase respect, the judge said calmly. It is earned through conduct, and nothing about your conduct today reflects that. Hensley reached behind her, grabbed the coffee cup once again, and brought it back to the podium in direct defiance of the prior warnings. Ms. Hensley, the judge said, his voice level but firm. I've already told you twice, no beverages at the podium. It's just coffee, she replied. It's not harmful. I'm not pouring it on your paperwork. You're deliberately ignoring courtroom rules, he said. This is about following instructions, not coffee. I'm standing here holding a cup, she said. That's hardly a crime. In this context, the judge replied, it becomes contempt. Contempt for repeatedly ignoring direct orders. She lifted the cup, took a slow sip, and stared directly at him. Miss Hensley, the judge said, this is your final warning. Put the cup down, or you will be held in contempt of court. She scoffed. Maybe if you spent less time managing coffee cups and more time understanding how the real world works, we'd all be done by now. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair. 5 seconds, then 7, then 10, then 12. That was how long the courtroom held its breath, watching pure defiance collide with judicial patience. Every second stretched as the tension grew heavier, like the room itself was waiting to see which would break first, authority or arrogance. When Judge Caprio finally spoke, his tone didn't waver. It stayed calm, even, and controlled. True authority doesn't need volume. Power doesn't need to announce itself, Miss Hensley, he said quietly. It simply exists. She gave a smug half-smile. Maybe your version doesn't need to, Your Honor, but mine does. She lifted her coffee cup, not to drink, but to make a point, and then she threw it. The lid flew off midair. Hot coffee splashed across the podium, the clerk's desk, and the lower edge of the bench. Clerk Paige Lewis gasped and pushed her chair back as the liquid spread across case files that dripped onto the embossed court seal. Drops streaked down Judge Caprio's robe. The entire courtroom went silent. No one moved. Judge Caprio didn't jump, didn't shout, didn't even flinch. He simply turned to the bailiff. Officer Harris, he said, take the defendant into custody. Harris reacted instantly. Within seconds, Victoria Hensley's arms were behind her back and handcuffs were secure. She pulled against them in disbelief. You can't be serious, she snapped. I'm very serious, the judge replied. Threats won't help you, but continued outbursts will earn you a cell. Clerk Lewis stood, coffee running down her sleeve. Your Honor, should I request additional officers? No, the judge said calmly. Officer Harris can handle it. He looked directly at Hensley. Her face was flushed, her voice shaking between anger and disbelief as the reality finally caught up to her. Miss Hensley, Judge Caprio said, you have just committed assault on a judicial officer, damaged court property, and engaged in direct criminal contempt. Officer Harris will escort you to holding. We will reconvene in 30 minutes after I change robes and the clerk secures the damaged documents. This is outrageous, she shouted. This, he replied, is consequence. Officer Harris guided her toward the exit. She tried twisting away, but he held steady. You humiliated me in front of all these people, she barked. Judge Caprio's voice followed her to the door. No, Miss Hensley, you did that on your own. The courtroom door shut behind her had ever privilege. She believed she had ended the moment the handcuffs closed. Judge Caprio rose from the bench. The court will recess for 30 minutes. Ms. Lewis, please record the damage and photograph the affected materials. Officer Nolan, Mr. Grant, remain nearby. We'll resume shortly. He stepped down from the bench, and the room finally released the breath it had been holding. People shifted in their seats, whispering under their breath, trying to process what they had just seen. The space felt different now, calmer, but still tense, as if the air hadn't fully settled. 30 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again. The same woman who marched in earlier with the confidence of someone used to getting her way returned, looking very different. Her designer outfit was the same, but the tone was not. She walked in wearing county-issued restraints, her posture far less forceful than before. The expensive sunglasses were gone, the phone had been confiscated, and the coffee cup she had used earlier was now tagged as evidence. Judge Caprio stepped back into the courtroom, wearing a fresh robe, the previous one already secured for documentation. Miss Lewis, the court clerk, had scrubbed down her desk and sealed the stained documents in clear evidence bags. The once chaotic scene now had the cold order of an official record. Officer Harris remained at Victoria Hensley's side. Her cuffs had been moved to the front, standard procedure for formal court appearances, but the shift did nothing to restore the arrogance she had displayed earlier. She looked smaller now, almost uncertain, As the judge prepared to address the contempt charge, Judge Caprio took his seat. Miss Hensley, you've been returned to address the matter of contempt. Before I continue, do you wish to say anything? She shrugged lightly. Sorry your robe got wet. The judge watched her carefully, his expression unchanged. Is that a sincere apology, or are you simply saying words for effect? She exhaled sharply. I don't know what you expect me to say. The truth, the judge replied. That would be a good start. Victoria's frustration bubbled back to the surface. You embarrassed me in front of a room full of strangers because I was holding a cup of coffee. You were asked multiple times to follow a simple courtroom rule. The judge answered. You ignored every direction, and then you escalated that defiance into physical action. I threw coffee, not a punch. Hot liquid can cause injury, he replied evenly. You put my clerk at risk, you disrupted an official proceeding, and you damaged court property. That is not a minor outburst. It is a serious violation. She didn't respond. Her jaw tightened instead. Judge Caprio opened his notepad and continued. Here are the facts. You were instructed 3 separate times to remove the beverage from the podium. You refused each time. You were told that continued disobedience would result in contempt. You responded by throwing the beverage across the courtroom, striking the bench and personnel. I was upset, she muttered. Emotions do not excuse misconduct, the judge said, and they do not erase consequences. She folded her arms slightly. So what do you want from me? Accountability, he said plainly. Fine. I'm sorry. Can I go now? The judge slowly shook his head. Miss Hensley, the law allows me to impose up to 30 days of custody immediately for summary contempt. I will not impose the maximum simply because I can. I will impose what is fair. She looked stunned, unsure what direction this was going. Your sentence is 30 days, Judge Caprio continued. But that term will be suspended on one condition. You will complete 5 full days of community service inside this courthouse. You will assist our custodial and clerical teams. You will not engage with the public. You will mop floors, organize documents, and learn what it takes to keep this institution functioning. Her mouth dropped open slightly in disbelief. In addition, he said, you will write formal, handwritten letters of apology to Officer Nolan, Mr. Harold Grant, and Miss Paige Lewis. These letters must be submitted within 7 days. No shortcuts, no digital messages, handwritten and delivered to the court. The judge continued, you will also cover all costs associated with the damage. This includes replacing the affected files, cleaning the robe, and compensating Miss Lewis for her time and clothing cleaning. She blinked rapidly. How much is that? $570, he replied. That's outrageous. That's responsibility, the judge said. Not punishment, responsibility. He looked to Officer Harris. Officer Harris, Miss Hensley will be released on her own recognizance while completing these requirements. If she fails to comply, the 30-day sentence will be enforced without delay. Yes, Your Honor, Harris replied. Judge Caprio turned back to Victoria, his tone steady but firm. Miss Hensley, consequences are not designed to humiliate. They exist to correct. You entered this courtroom assuming your financial status placed you above these rules. It does not. You assumed raising your voice or creating disruption would give you leverage. It will not. And you believed that throwing coffee would shift control in your favor. It did the opposite. It revealed how little you understand about the value of justice. Victoria looked down, the fight leaving her posture. You will begin your community service Monday at 8 a.m., the judge continued. Report directly to Miss Lewis. She will give you your assignments. You will arrive on time, appropriately dressed, and you will complete your tasks respectfully. If you have questions, ask politely. If you have arguments, reserve them for your attorney. He paused. Do you understand? A quiet, reluctant reply followed. Yes. The judge raised an eyebrow. Yes, what? She swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Caprio nodded once. Officer Harris, you may remove the restraints. Officer Harris unlatched the cuffs. and Victoria Hensley slowly massaged her wrists, as though reality had only just begun to sink in. Judge Caprio shifted his attention past her and looked out toward the rest of the courtroom, toward Officer Nolan, toward Harold Grant, and toward the spectators who had been waiting patiently for their own matters to be heard. The atmosphere tightened with expectation. "Before we adjourn," the judge said, "I want to address everyone in this room." His voice carried across the gallery, steady, deliberate, and grounded. "When someone disrespects this court, the insult isn't aimed at me personally. It's aimed at every citizen who waits here for justice. It's aimed at every officer who swears an oath to serve. It's aimed at every clerk who stays late processing files because the workload never stops. And it's aimed at every person who trusts that the rules apply equally to all." He paused, letting the words settle like dust in still air. "This room doesn't belong to me," he continued. "It belongs to the people who rely on it. And when someone tries to treat accountability like something they can purchase or negotiate their way out of, they diminish every person who cannot do the same. That won't happen here. Not today. Not ever." A quiet ripple moved through the gallery, not noise, but recognition of what had just been said. Judge Caprio turned his attention to Officer Nolan. "Officer Nolan, I want to thank you for your professionalism. You were insulted, you were threatened, and you still remain calm. That's what proper law enforcement looks like." "Thank you, Your Honor," Nolan replied. Next, the judge nodded toward Harold Grant. "Mr. Grant, thank you for coming forward. You were under no obligation to testify. Yet you did so because you believed in the process. This system stands because ordinary people like you choose to participate." Harold dipped his head respectfully. Then the judge looked to his clerk. "Miss Lewis, are you all right?" "Yes, Your Honor. I just need a new blouse." "Send me the receipt," he said. "The court will cover it." She nodded appreciatively. Judge Caprio lifted his gavel. "This court is adjourned." The gavel fell with a firm crack that echoed across the room. That be why that evening, one headline had spread through nearly every corner of the internet. "Woman throws coffee at judge, handcuffed 30 seconds later." But what captured public attention wasn't the thrown cup. It was the judge's response, a single, calm directive that replayed in countless clips. "Officer Harris, secure the defendant." No raised voice, no anger, just control, absolute and unwavering. Some people argued he should have ordered immediate jail time. Others felt he displayed grace she hadn't earned. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing. The sting of the moment came not from the coffee, but from the collision between arrogance and authority. Later that afternoon, in the privacy of his chambers, Judge Frank Caprio opened his journal and wrote one sentence. "Power is calm." Underneath, he added another. "Anger rattles the innocent. Calm reveals the truth." A knock sounded at the door. Miss Lewis leaned in. "Your Honor, should I call a medic? That coffee was pretty hot. You could have a burn." "I'm all right," he replied. "You're sure?" she asked again. He gave a small smile. "I've been yelled at, threatened, and even spit on in this job. Hot coffee is a new addition, but not the worst." "For what it's worth," she said, "you didn't flinch." "Flinching hands power to the wrong person," he answered, "and we can't allow that here." "Do you think she'll finish her service?" "She will," he said without hesitation, "because the one thing people like Miss Hensley fear more than embarrassment is confinement." Miss Lewis considered that. "Do you think she'll actually learn anything from this?" The judge glanced at the stained case file on his desk. "That I think she'll remember it. And sometimes remembering is the first step toward learning." Before leaving for the day, he added one more order, a notification letter to Harold Grant and his wife, letting them know the case had been resolved and that their participation mattered. Because justice doesn't end with a ruling. It extends to the people who walk out the door feeling heard. When Victoria began her 5 days of court-ordered service, her tasks were simple but humbling. She mopped corridors, stocked supplies, and helped file documents. On the third day, Miss Lewis found her sitting quietly during her lunch break, watching a long line of people wait for their hearings. "You doing okay?" Miss Lewis asked. Victoria nodded softly. I didn't realize so many people come here every day. About 200, and they all wait. Victoria said quietly. Even the ones who have money? Especially the ones who have money, Miss Lewis replied, because money doesn't move you to the front of the line here. Victoria lowered her gaze. I treated you terribly. Yes, Miss Lewis said honestly. You did. I'm sorry. Miss Lewis sat beside her. Apology accepted. But you should understand something. Judge Caprio could have chosen a very different path. He could have made an example out of you. He could have imposed the maximum penalty without hesitation. But he didn't. Do you know why? Victoria shook her head. Because he values lessons more than punishment, Miss Lewis said. And you just lived through one. On the 6th day, Victoria delivered her handwritten apologies. Officer Nolan framed his. Harold Grant kept his folded in his wallet. Miss Lewis placed hers on her desk. And in his office, Judge Caprio kept the coffee-stained file. Not as a victory, but as a reminder that respect is earned, not assumed. She walked into the courtroom believing money created privilege. She walked out understanding that respect creates freedom.